After 3.5 years of marriage, I discovered my wife's affair in February 2018. I worked as a technical sales director for a software company, a contract position that required frequent travel but also allowed me to work remotely when I returned home. Jessica held an incredibly lucrative position at a marketing firm downtown. Things had remained somewhat strained between us due to her increasingly long hours and my work travel, but I still considered our marriage fairly strong. I met Jessica 5 years ago at a barbecue hosted by a mutual friend. We hit it off immediately once we started talking. To be completely honest, I felt like being with someone so stunning and intelligent was almost surreal. My straightforward, no-nonsense personality somehow appealed to her refined sensibilities. After just a few weeks of dating, we were completely infatuated with each other. When we'd meet at each other's apartments, the physical attraction was undeniable and overwhelming. After 18 months of dating, we got married and moved into a spacious apartment while saving money for a house down payment. Things started shifting after our first 3 years of marriage. Even though I still loved her deeply, I noticed she would snap at me over trivial things. When I brought up her late nights at the office and the increasingly frequent work dinners, she would become defensive and irritated. Since she was climbing the corporate ladder irremissively, she claimed these commitments were part of paying her dues. That was her justification, at least. She told me that since I was also gone for weeks at a thank you in, I had no right to question her choices. In reality, I had only been traveling for 3 or 4 days every 5 or 6 weeks, so I assured her I could definitely reduce my travel commitments. These circular arguments never reached any resolution. Looking back now, I realize I was completely oblivious to what was actually happening. Aside from our declining intimacy and her consistently late work hours, I never would have suspected infidelity. I simply thought she was exhausted from her demanding job. But being rejected so frequently when I initiated physical contact had definitely wounded my pride. Though she had a work phone and could have been using it for secretive communication, I never witnessed the suspicious texting behavior I'd read about in other stories. She used our spare bedroom as a home office and spent countless hours in there. Around September 2017, Jessica started coming home from work only to leave again for evening work functions. This pattern increased from 1 night per week to more than 3 nights weekly. While I'm not naturally a jealous person, she was undeniably attractive, and I knew she must be fending off advances from male colleagues. Despite working with far more male executives than female ones, she projected an image of being solely focused on her career advancement. The first thank you in I truly suspected infidelity was about a month before everything fell apart. She had made a quick stop at the Ramasserie store before coming home. I was helping her carry bags from the car when I noticed something pink gleaming from just beneath the front passenger seat. It was one of her bras. She had a preference for a particular brand from a specific boutique, so I immediately recognized it as hers. Looking back, that bra was an obvious warning sign. She always removes her bra first when she's feeling particularly aroused, sliding it off from underneath her shirt. I'm not sure why, but seeing that discarded bra made me feel instantly sick to my stomach. I couldn't understand why it would be under the car seat. I didn't mention it immediately. My heart was pounding so violently that I nearly felt dizzy. When I brought the Ramasserie bags back into the kitchen, Jessica asked me if I was okay and mentioned that I looked like I had seen a ghost. I simply brushed off her comment. It took every ounce of willpower to mask my emotions, but I did my best not to appear upset or betrayed. That night and the following day, I began reconsidering all the signs I might have overlooked. Other than that bra, I had no concrete proof. She worked in a downtown office building, and we lived in a reasonably large city. I decided to temporarily shelve the affair suspicion and consider giving her more focused attention instead. One Friday after work, I prepared an elaborate dinner and set our dining table with fine china, silverware, and candles. I purchased a flower arrangement and an expensive bottle of wine. When she arrived home, breezing in as usual after work, I showed her the dinner and everything I had prepared. She apologized profusely and said she was sorry, but she had to meet coworkers at a nearby wine bar. She mentioned needing to shower first, but said she could remab a quick bite with me before leaving. I think I went completely silent because my insides were churning violently. I won't try to describe the specific type of rage I was experiencing right then, but I had reached my limit. While she was showering, I remabbed my work cell phone and slipped it into her purse. I had been contemplating this as a way to track her location using my personal phone. After that, I walked into the kitchen and threw all the food and flowers directly into the trash. When she finished her shower and got ready, she looked absolutely stunning as always. "All right, let's eat," she said cheerfully. "Never mind, go meet your friends." I responded flatly. She gave me a strange look and asked if I was Anrami. "I'm disappointed that you never want to spend Thanksgiving with me anymore," I said quietly. She became irritated and sarcastically told me to stop acting like a child, commenting on my apparent short temper. "Foolish me," I muttered while standing there, letting everything sink in. For once I thought we should spend the evening together. She just gave me a dismissive smile and walked out. I pulled out my personal phone and started tracking my work phone's location as she drove away. About 20 minutes later, she stopped at the wine bar she frequently visited with colleagues. I decided to drive there and look for her car. Sure enough, it was parked in the lot. I parked across the street and waited to see if I could spot her through the windows. I felt completely unlike myself, like some desperate stalker. But I told myself I needed to calm this ramming paranoia about her whereabouts. About an hour after I arrived, I watched her exit the bar with a man. He had the polished appearance of an executive from her company. He pulled her close and kissed her lips. My entire body went numb, and my stomach started clenching painfully. They walked to a different vehicle and climbed bed inside together. When their car pulled away, I followed at a distance. Predictably, they drove to a hotel about 10 minutes away. I stopped on a side street near the hotel entrance and watched them exit the vehicle holding hands before walking inside together. I'd seen enough. The confirmation I'd been dreading was now undeniable reality. I sat in my car for what felt like hours. Though it was probably only 30 minutes, my mind was racing through every possible scenario and emotion. Rage, betrayal, humiliation, sadness, they all crashed over me in waves. Eventually, I drove home in complete silence, my hands ramming the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I arrived home, I walked straight to our bedroom and pulled out 2 large duffel bags from the closet. I started packing methodically: clothes, toiletries, important documents, anything I couldn't easily replace. I moved through our apartment like someone in a trance, disconnected from my own actions. I took my laptop, some books, and a few sentimental items. I wasn't thinking clearly about long-term plans. I just knew I needed to leave immediately. I withdrew a substantial amount of cash from our joint account, though not enough to completely drain it. I wanted her to know I was gone, but I didn't want to be vindictive about finances at that moment. I packed my car quietly, making several trips. The entire Thanksgiving. My work phone was still in her purse at that hotel, silently transmitting its location. Around midnight, I saw on my tracking app that she was finally heading home. I had perhaps 30 minutes before she arrived. I left a simple note on the kitchen counter. "I know everything. Don't contact me. We're done." Nothing more. No explanation. No accusations. No emotion. Just those stark, final words. Then I got in my car and drove. I didn't have a specific destination initially, I just drove north, putting miles between myself and that life. The betrayal felt like physical pain, a constant ache in my chest that wouldn't subside. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee. By dawn, I had covered nearly 400 miles and found myself in a small mountain town I'd passed through once years ago. It was quiet, isolated, and perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. I checked into a modest motel and slept for 12 straight hours. When I woke, I turned off my personal phone completely. I knew Jessica would be trying to reach me frantically, but I had no interest in her explanations or excuses. Over the next week, I found a small cabin for rent on the outskirts of town. It was rustic but comfortable, with stunning views of the surrounding mountains. The owner was an elderly man who asked few questions and accepted cash payment for the first 3 months up front. I told Hyan I was a writer, seeking solitude, which wasn't entirely untrue. I did need solitude, just not for writing. I set up a basic living space with essentials purchased from the local general store. My remote work arrangement meant I could continue my job from anywhere with decent internet, which the cabin surprisingly had. I contacted my employer and explained I was dealing with a family emergency and would be working exclusively remotely for the foreseeable future. They were understanding and accommodating. I reached out to the few people who needed to know I was alive: my parents, my brother, and my closest friend from college, Daniel. I asked them to keep my location confidential, and assured them I was physically safe but needed thank youing alone. They respected my wishes, though I could hear the concern in their voices. Days turned into weeks, then months. I established a simple routine: work during the day, long hikes in the afternoon, reading in the evenings. I stopped checking social media entirely and kept my phone usage to the bare minimum required for work. The isolation was initially difficult, but gradually became therapeutic. I had thank you in to process the betrayal without constant reminders or outside interference. The anger slowly transformed into something else, not quite acceptance, but perhaps a recognition that the marriage I thought I had never really existed. I started taking better care of myself physically. I began running every morning, something I hadn't done since college. I ate healthier, cut back significantly on alcohol, and got more sleep than I had in years. The physical transformation was remarkable but noticeable. I lost the extra weight I'd been carrying and built muscle from the hiking and running. I raised a full beard, partially because it was practical for the cold mountain climate, and partially because I wanted to look different from the person I'd been. Around the 6-month mark, I realized I needed to formally end the marriage. I couldn't remain in this limbo indefinitely. I contacted a divorce attorney in my home city through email and explained the situation. He was efficient and professional, handling everything remotely. Since I wanted nothing from Jessica, no property division battles, no alienity, just a clean break, the process moved relatively quickly, despite her attorney's attempts to initiate contact and discussion. I refused all communication attempts. The divorce was finalized about 10 months after I left. Life in the mountains became my new normal. I made a few casual acquaintances in town: the owner of the local coffee shop, a woman named Sarah who worked at the bookstore, a retired couple who lived down the road. These were surface-level friendships, nothing deep, which suited me perfectly. I wasn't ready for meaningful connections yet. I dated occasionally, brief encounters with women I met during my infrequent trips to slightly larger nearby towns. Nothing serious, nothing that required vulnerability. My work performance actually improved during this period. Without the stress of a failing marriage and the emotional drain of Jessica's betrayal, I could focus entirely on my projects. My sales numbers increased significantly, and I earned several substantial bonuses. I invested this extra money carefully, building financial security for whatever future awaited me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My professional life thrived precisely when my personal life had collapsed. About 13 months after I disappeared, I was having coffee at my usual spot in town when I noticed a familiar face. Brianna, one of Jessica's former co-workers and someone I'd considered a friend during the marriage, was sitting at a corner table. We made eye contact before I could avoid it. She stood immediately and approached me with a mixture of surprise and concern on her face. "Marcus? Oh my God, is that really you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded but didn't stand. "Hello, Brianna. What are you doing here?" She explained she was visiting the area with friends for a hiking trip and had stopped in town for supplies. We talked briefly, superficial conversation about my new appearance and her surprise at finding me. I could tell she wanted to ask deeper questions but was restraining herself. Finally, she asked directly, "Does Jessica know where you are?" "No, and I'd prefer to keep it that way," I replied firmly. Brianna nodded slowly, studying my face. "She's been looking for you everywhere, Marcus. She's devastated. She ended things with high-end immediately after you left. She lost her job because the affair became public knowledge within her company. She's really struggling." I felt a brief flicker of satisfaction hearing about the consequences Shed faced, but it was quickly replaced by emptiness. "I appreciate you telling me, but my answer remains the same. Please don't mention you saw me." Brianna looked conflicted but eventually aramied. We finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence, and she left shortly after. I assumed that would be the end of it, but I underestimated both Jessica's determination and Brianna's inability to keep secrets. About 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was returning from my regular run when I saw an unfamiliar car parked near my cabin. My stomach dropped when I recognized the figure sitting on my porch steps. Jessica stood slowly when she saw me approaching. She looked different, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her usually impeccable style had been replaced with casual jeans and a simple sweater. For several long moments, we just stared at each other. I finally broke the silence. "How did you find me?" She smiled weakly. "I ran into Brianna a couple weeks ago. She didn't want to tell me." But I pushed her until she gave me the general area. I've been coming here on weekends, driving around hoping to spot you. I felt a flash of anger at Brianna's betrayal of my trust, but I pushed it aside. What do you want, Jessica? She stepped toward me, and I instinctively took a step back. She noticed and stopped, hurt flashing across her face. I need to talk to you, Marcus. I need you to understand what happened. I need to explain. I shook my head. There's nothing to explain. You cheated. You destroyed our marriage. I left. We're divorced. That's the complete story. Please, she said, her voice cracking. Just give me an hour. If you still want me to leave after that, I will, and I promise I'll never contact you again. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave immediately, to maintain the boundaries I'd built so carefully. But another part, perhaps the part that remembered loving her once, was curious about what she had to say. Against my better judgment, I gestured toward 2 chairs on the porch. 1 hour. That's all you get. We sat on the porch chairs, maintaining careful distance between us. Jessica seemed nervous, fidgeting with her hands and avoiding direct eye contact initially. I remained silent, letting her take the lead since this meeting was her idea. She finally began speaking, her voice soft and tentative. I know you probably hate me. I know I destroyed everything good we had. I know there's no excuse for what I did. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But I need you to know that I never intended for any of it to happen. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. No one ever intends to have an affair, Jessica. But you made a choice. Multiple choices, actually. Every thank you when you met Hyen. Every thank you when you lied to me. Every thank you when you got in his car. Those were all choices. She nodded, tears beginning to stream down her face. You're right. I made terrible choices. The company politics, the competition, the pressure to advance it, all became consuming. He was my direct supervisor. He had influence over my career. He was charming and manipulative, and I convinced myself it was just networking, just playing the corporate game. When did it become more than networking? I asked coldly. She winced at my tone but answered honestly. It started with drinks after work meetings, conversations that lasted too long, compliance that crossed professional boundaries. By the thank you when I recognized what was happening, I was already emotionally involved. The physical affair started about 4 months before you left. 4 months. 4 months of lies, of coming home to me and pretending everything was normal. 4 months of shared dinners, conversations, moments of intimacy, all built on deception. Did you love Hyen? The question surprised even me. I hadn't planned to ask it, but suddenly I needed to know. Jessica was quiet for a long moment before responding. I thought I did, briefly. Or maybe I loved what he represented: success, power, validation. But after you left, after everything fell apart, I realized it was never real. He wasn't interested in building anything meaningful with me. Once the affair became public knowledge and threatened his own career, he turned on me completely, blamed me for everything, called me desperate and delusional. She described how her company had essentially forced her to resign after the affair became widely known. The man involved was transferred but retained his position because he had more seniority and political capital. Jessica's professional reputation was destroyed overnight. She lost her social circle, as most of her friendships had been work-related. She moved to a smaller apartment and took a significantly lower-paying job at a different company. The financial and social consequences had been severe. I spent months trying to find you, she continued. I hired a private investigator, but you'd covered your tracks too well. I reached out to everyone we knew, but no one would tell me anything. Your family was polite but firm. They said you were safe but didn't want contact. I was desperate, Marcus. I know I hurt you beyond measure, but you shattered me too by disappearing so completely. I couldn't apologize, couldn't explain, couldn't even rameve the marriage properly because you were just gone. I felt a slight pang of guilt at her words, but pushed it aside. You don't get to be the victim here, Jessica. You don't get to make my response to your betrayal about your suffering. I left because staying would have destroyed me. I left to survive. She nodded vigorously. I know you're right. I'm not trying to make myself the victim. I'm just trying to help you understand that you're leaving, while completely justified, had consequences for both of us. We sat in silence for several minutes. I noticed how different she looked from the polished, confident woman married. The mountains behind us were peaceful, birds calling to each other, a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The contrast between the natural serenity and the emotional turmoil of this conversation was striking. Finally, Jessica spoke again. "I saw how good you look now. Brianna mentioned you seemed happier, healthier. The beard suits you. This life suits you." "It does," I confirmed. "I've found peace here. I've rebuilt myself into someone I actually like. The marriage, our entire relationship, it was making me into someone I didn't recognize. Someone anxious, insecure, constantly questioning his worth. Out here, I've rediscovered who I am without all that noise." Jessica smiled sadly. "I'm glad. Truly, you deserve happiness. I wish I could be part of it again. I wish I could have a chance to prove I've changed, that I've learned from my mistakes." "What exactly are you asking for?" I said, though I already knew the answer. She looked directly at me for the first thank you since we'd sat down. "I want you to consider giving us another chance. Not immediately, I know that's impossible. But maybe we could start slowly. Coffee, conversations, rebuilding, trust gradually. I still love you, Marcus. I never stopped, even when I was making the worst decisions of my life. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway." I stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the mountain vista. I'd known this was coming, had prepared myself mentally for this request during the weeks since Brianna had appeared in town. "Jessica, do you remember when we used to talk about hypothetical situations? You'd ask me, what would you do if questions?" She nodded, looking confused. "I remember. You hated those games. I asked you once, hypothetically, what you would do if I ever cheated on you. Do you remember your answer?" Her face paled slightly as the memory returned. I said I could never forgive cheating, that it would be the one unforgivable act that would end our marriage immediately. I turned to face her. "Exactly. You were absolutely certain, no hesitation. You said trust, once broken that completely, could never be fully repaired. Those were your exact words." "People change their perspectives when confronted with reality," she protested weakly. "Easy to be absolute and judgmental about hypotheticals. It's different when you're living through the loss, feeling the relief, understanding the complexity of human weakness." I shook my head. "Maybe you've changed your perspective, but I haven't changed mine. You taught me that boundary, Jessica. You established that standard. I'm simply holding both of us to it." Her face crumpled and fresh tears began flowing. "So that's it? There's no possibility? Not even eventually?" I thought carefully before responding. "I don't know what the future holds. Right now, today, I can't imagine reconciling. I can't imagine trusting you again. I can't imagine sharing my life with someone who betrayed me so thoroughly. Maybe in 5 years, 10 years, that might change. But I'm not promising anything, and I'm not asking you to wait." "What if I want to wait?" she asked desperately. "What if I'm willing to give you all the thank you you need?" I met her eyes steadily. "Then you'd be wasting your life on a possibility that may never materialize. You need to move forward, Jessica. You need to build a new life that doesn't revolve around fixing what you broke. That's not healthy for either of us." We talked for another 30 minutes, the conversation gradually becoming less emotionally charged. She asked about my life here, and I gave vague, general answers. I asked about her new job, and she described it briefly. The familiarity of conversing with her was unsettling. It reminded me of earlier thank you's when communication between us had been easy and natural. But that comfort was also dangerous, a reminder of what had once existed and could potentially trap me into reconsidering my boundaries. Eventually, as the sun began setting behind the mountains, Jessica stood to leave. "Can I at least email you something, just to stay in touch, nothing pressure or expectations?" I considered the request. "You can have my email address. I can't promise I'll respond regularly, but I won't block you." I wrote it down on a piece of paper and handed it to her. She clutched it like something precious, nodding gratefully. As she walked toward her car, she turned back one final thank you "Marcus, for what it's worth, I genuinely am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, not just sorry for the consequences I faced. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I destroyed something beautiful. I'm sorry I wasn't the person you deserved." I didn't respond immediately, just nodded acknowledgement. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing on the porch, watching her taillights disappear down the mountain road. That night, I went for a long run despite the darkness, needing to process the emotional intensity of the day. The encounter had stirred up feelings I thought were safely buried. Not love, exactly, but memories of love, echoes of what we'd once had. But those echoes weren't enough to rebuild on. They were just ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Over the following weeks, Jessica did send occasional emails. They were respectful, brief, mostly about mundane aspects of her life. I responded to some, ignored others. She mentioned she'd been offered a job opportunity in a different state, a chance to truly start fresh somewhere new. She asked if I would ever consider moving somewhere together, starting completely over in a place with no history for either of us. My response was simple: I'm happy where I am. I hope you find happiness wherever you go. Her last email came about 2 months after her visit. She'd accepted the job and was moving across the country. She wrote that she understood we would likely never reconcile, that she accepted my decision, and that she hoped I would find someone worthy of the man it'd become. She thanked me for seeing her that day, and for being honest rather than giving her false hope. She signed off saying she would always love me, but that she was finally ready to try moving forward without me. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop and walked outside. The night was clear, stars brilliantly visible in the unpolluted mountain sky. I felt a strange mixture of relief, sadness, and closure. The chapter was finally, definitively closed, not with dramatic confrontation or passionate reconciliation, but with quiet acceptance of irreparable damage and separate paths forward. It felt like the right ending, even if it wasn't a happy one. 6 months have passed since then. I'm still in my mountain cabin, still working remotely, still running every morning and hiking every afternoon. I've started dating someone casually, a teacher from the nearest town who shares my love of the outdoors and appreciates solitude as much as companionship. It's uncomplicated and genuine, built on honest communication rather than unspoken expectations. I don't know if it will develop into something deeper, and am not rushing to find out. Some of the ends I think about Jessica and wonder if she found the fresh start she was seeking. I hope she did. Not because I want to reconcile or because I've forgiven her completely, but because I've learned that holding on to bitterness only poisons your own future. She made choices that destroyed our marriage, and I made the choice to walk away and rebuild. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. My life now looks nothing like the life I had 3 years ago, and I'm grateful for that. The betrayal was devastating, but it also freed me from a relationship that had become unhealthy long before the affair was revealed. It forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed and to create a life based on my own values and needs rather than compromise and accommodation. In a strange way, Jessica's worst decision led to my best outcome. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I can acknowledge she was suffering, confused, and weak without excusing her actions or allowing her back into my life. I can wish her well without trusting her again. These nuances took thank you to understand, but they've given me peace. The rage has faded into indifference, which feels like its own form of victory. To anyone reading this who's experienced similar betrayal, know that there's no single right way to respond. Some people reconcile successfully. Some people, like me, need to walk away completely and rebuild alone. Both paths are valid. What matters is being honest with yourself about what you need, setting firm boundaries, and not letting guilt or pressure from others dictate your healing journey. Trust yourself, take your thank you, and don't settle for less than you deserve. Life after betrayal can be different and, eventually, better than what came before.